Our reading for this morning comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 4. Paul tells us about jars of clay and the power of Christ that lies within. Paul writes, "What we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you. This is the word of the Lord." All right. Well, anyways, we think about that broken plate as I grab my things. And, this text, Paul talks to us about jars of clay, jars which do break. And the verse I want to focus on from our text today comes from verse 7. Here's what Paul says. He says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us." Could you please pray with me? May the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be ever pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen. So, in my very short life, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit. Gotten to travel around the country, travel around the world, and oftentimes in my travels, I get a chance to go see art. I always enjoyed going to art museums and seeing some of the really neat paintings, some of the really neat sculptures that are there. And of course, art isn't just simply paintings and sculptures. Sometimes it's buildings, architecture. It's entire designs that can be found in everyday life. But art isn't always something that's seen. Sometimes art is heard, like in music. I've seen a lot of art. I've experienced a lot of art. I've heard a lot of art. But I can tell you that there are very few things, very few pieces of art that I truly consider a masterpiece. You see, masterpieces, there's something different about them. They're in a league of their own, well above any other kind of art that you see. And in those masterpieces, you see the handiwork of the person, of the artist who made it. You see so much more meaning, so much beauty, a level of beauty that sometimes can't be put into words. Now, many people will say that beauty's in the eye of the beholder. You could technically make the same argument for a masterpiece. But see, I actually think you can create objective rules for a masterpiece. What makes something that? And there's actually this organization, they're called Cell Magazine. They created 3 criteria for what you consider a masterpiece. And here's the thing about a masterpiece. Number 1, a masterpiece is original. There is nothing else out there like it. Or if there is something else out there like it, it came after the masterpiece. And then the artist who, if they're describing it, has to footnote the masterpiece that they borrowed from. It's original. It's unique. The second thing that makes a masterpiece is that it stands the test of time. Now, that could be physical, of course, such as getting damaged, or maybe it could just mean the meaning or the power or what the artist is trying to convey through that masterpiece. It's maybe something that was created 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, is still enjoyed in the same way. That same beauty is beheld as it was when it first came out. It stands a test of time. But then there's a third thing. It changes the way generations of artists and scientists think about their field. In other words, it's not just original, it's not just resilient, it's pioneering. It gets artists maybe to start borrowing those techniques, to start re-looking, to start revisiting their own work through the lens of whatever that masterpiece is. And I think if we had to find some masterpieces that fit these, here are three of them. The first one is in that top left. You'll see a portrait of George Frederick Handel. Now, it's not the picture that I'm thinking about here. It's actually the sound. George Frederick Handel, one of his hallmark oratorios is called The Messiah. It's a 2-hour-long concert that follows the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And it is absolutely beautiful. It's one of my favorite. There are thousands of performances around the world every year, usually around Christmas time. And then another masterpiece would be the one below that. What is that portrait called? We all know it. It's probably the first picture that comes to mind when we think of a painting. It's the Mona Lisa. This is also something that is completely original. Not that portraits were original in Da Vinci's time. It's rather about the model that was used. It was about the paint techniques that Da Vinci incorporated into that piece that had never been used before. It's about the level of detail as it ties in to the curvature of the model, the valleys and the rivers. But even more noteworthy, a lot of people don't realize this, what made this so pioneering was the fact that the model was turned sideways and then looked directly at the painter. No portrait had ever been painted like that before the Mona Lisa. It was a first. And now it's commonplace for just about everything. Third masterpiece over there. What's the third masterpiece? Leaning Tower of Pisa. We don't know it as the Tower of Pisa. We don't know it as the bell tower of the Pisa Cathedral. We know it as the Leaning Tower. And of course, we know the famous stories behind it, but it is also very original. It was started 1,000 years ago in the Romanesque architectural style, which was very popular at that time. It is one of 3 buildings on site for the Cathedral of Pisa. It is the bell tower. Next to it, you have the actual cathedral, and then behind it, you have what's called the baptistry, where baptisms usually happened. And of course, as it was being built, it started to lean because the builders didn't realize that the soil underneath it was uneven. And so that soil caused the degrees to make it start tilting. In fact, they had to stop construction so much that it was only completed about 200 years after. So, nevertheless, we still refer to it as a masterpiece. Now, of course, when we think of a masterpiece, we think of something that is of great value, something that is beautiful, something that we treasure. And that's the word Paul uses. He talks about a treasure. And a treasure, great value, great beauty. But when you think of a masterpiece, especially these 3 kind of works, you realize that if you have something valuable, you'd want to secure it pretty well. The Mona Lisa is, well, behind glass in the Louvre, and they don't even let you get very close. I think there's a rail right there that keeps you from getting directly up against it. So instead, you do what all the other tourists do, and you turn around and get a selfie with it, kind of like this. But then there's also the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Not that anyone's going to steal it. It's rather that you need to secure the thing. And actually, that tower had continually been tilting and tilting and tilting until 2008. Because they started a reinforcement process in 2001 to keep it from finally toppling over, and it took 7 years for it to settle. So it stopped leaning about 14 years ago, 16 years ago. It's all pretty significant stuff. But see, because masterpieces, you need to secure them. If I had to pick something to secure a treasure in, I'll tell you what it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be a jar of clay. The treasure that Paul is referring to is pretty straightforward. He's talking about Christ. And this treasure is unique because it is not behind glass. It is not bolted or anchored to the ground. It is not stuck in some musical database for us to listen to. No, it is something in you and in me. It is Christ. It is the knowledge of the glory of God. It is the face of Jesus in and through us. And it is the greatest masterpiece, the greatest treasure we could ask for. And yet Paul tells us that the greatest masterpiece and treasure is in a jar of clay. Why? A little bit about that, because if you look at these jars, these are actually jars that were from around Jesus' time, from around Paul's time. And I actually saw some of these down at the Museum of the Bible. They have several there. And the chief curator gave us a tour, and he told our group that These are the equivalent of Amazon Prime cardboard boxes in the ancient world, because these were shipping jars. They were sent all over the Roman Empire. No matter where you were, you would find these jars around. Now you also notice that they have a pointed bottom to it. They don't really stand up well on their own, and that's because what would happen is they would have either big vats of sand or really soft ground, and you would plant the jars into it to give it some security as they stood upright. But if I again had to pick a place, a masterpiece, it wouldn't be this jar, because one, why would I want to put something in a jar that can't stand on its own? Why would I want to put something in a jar that only has so long of a life? Because if you look at all these jars too, even the ones at the Museum of the Bible, all of them, like that plate I pulled out for the kids, had fractures in them. All of these jars were found broken, and they were reconstructed into the jars that you see there. Why would I want to put it in something that if you just give enough of a hit, the whole thing breaks? It doesn't make sense. That is not where I'd want to showcase and store something of value. So, Paul says, though, that we have this treasure in jars of clay. What is the jar of clay? Well, someone answered it. Maybe the better question is, who is the jar of clay? And yes, it's me. It's you. Because think about it. As human beings, we don't stand on our own. We need to be rooted in something that we believe, something that is solid, a foundation that keeps us upright, especially when things get hard, when things get weighty. We are also fragile. If things happen in our lives that get too difficult, we break. And of course, when we look at that jar, we have things that are of value. We don't always like to showcase them. Sometimes we like to tuck them away out of fear of them being taken, fear of losing it. Paul says that we are the jar of clay. And of course, if we are a jar of clay, there's a reality behind that. At some point, that jar of clay is going to break. Now, this image, what I love about it is you can see that on this jar, it was once a very beautiful, ornate jar. You can see the craftsmanship, the work that goes into them. And you know what? I think about it too, a lot like our lives. We may be a jar of clay, but so is our lives. But the reality is, I don't think we're always content with that. Because if I'm being real, I want my life to be a masterpiece. What do I mean by that? I want my life to be fully original. I want it to be exclusively unique and Chris and nobody else. So that when other people look at my life, they can say, oh yeah, that was Chris. I also want my life and the way I live, the choices I make, to stand the test of time. I don't want things to come into my life and ruin my routines and ruin the things I look forward to and ruin the things that I'm working towards. I want that masterpiece. And can I say too that don't we all want to make choices that inspire our kids, that inspire future generations, maybe influence them to make positive choices with us as the example? We're trying all to create a masterpiece out of our life, but we keep forgetting sometimes that we're clay. Why is that? It's because no matter what plans we make, no matter how grand of dreams we have, things happen. Life happens. Things break. Relationships break. Job opportunities we thought we had go away. The promotion didn't come. We didn't make the soccer team, even though we had been trying so hard to get on the team. Marriages break. Things don't go the way we do. Maybe even it's something medical that we live with for the rest of our lives. And as those things, those negative things happen, those fractures begin to form inside of us. That pain, that suffering we face, whatever that looks like. Now, when those things happen, we really just have two choices. And I'll show you the first choice. I actually think it's kind of this plate. Now, for those of you sitting pretty far back, it's probably hard to see, but the kids noticed There are cracks all throughout this plate, because if I get closer and I walk around, you can actually start seeing the cracks. You can see what's going on, but from far away, it looks like a perfectly fine plate. There's nothing wrong with it. And see, the first choice I can make is that I can try and rebuild my life just like this plate. And I can get it back to at least looking somewhat like it was before that tragedy happened. I can get it looking a little bit more like the life I'm trying to build for myself, but of course, no matter how hard I try to reconstruct it, it's never going to be the same. But I don't want other people to see that. So what am I going to do? I'm going to keep my distance. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to always be away from people. Just I'm not going to let them in to know the real me. Because I don't believe that the bad things in my life are going to be beneficial. I believe that other people might judge me for my problems, that other people are going to hurt me for them. And so we try and create something, but then we realize as we go on, it's never really fixed. It's never really satisfying, because we're doubting. We're doubting that anything good can come from tragedy. It's not beautiful. That's one option, but then there's a second option. Option number 2 is, this. What you're looking at, this is an example of an ancient Japanese art form called kintsugi. Now, kintsugi is, you can find their pieces all over the world now. But what you're looking at is a bowl. This picture does not do justice to kintsugi, but it's a bowl that is inlaid with gold. Now, this bowl was broken. It was shattered. But what you do is when you take that shattered bowl is you grab the majority pieces you can, but you can't get them all, of course, because, you'll never have a perfect bowl again. But then you take those cracks and you inlay them with gold. With gold mixed with the resin. And then you can fill in all of the cracks and all of the seams and all of the broken places, and you can have a good bowl again. I'll tell you something. I was actually looking this week to see if I could buy some kintsugi and I could show you a real piece of it, but I couldn't afford one off the top of my, just in my wallet, because that bowl right there is probably worth more than it was before it broke. It's got gold in it. But there's something beautiful about kintsugi. It shows us that there is beauty in brokenness. And if you'll notice that it's not trying to hide the broken cracks. It's not trying to keep its distance. Instead, it is showcasing the brokenness, the pain, the challenges. It's saying that there is something beautiful about it, that it is part of the whole piece. Because you know what? Just as we are jars of clay, we're also a masterpiece. Jesus made you a masterpiece. What does this look like in our own lives? I'll give you an example of this person. Her name is Catherine Wolfe. She runs a ministry called Hope Heals. Catherine, at age 26, had her whole life going for her. That masterpiece she was building with her husband was coming to fruition until some defect that she had that she didn't even know she did in her mind was a brain aneurysm, and she had a stroke, and this stroke was a level 3, and most people who have a level 3 stroke don't survive it. At age 26, she had this massive stroke that changed her life forever. And after a 16-hour surgery and prayers nonstop by her husband, her friends, and her family, and several more surgeries later, Catherine reemerged. Missing part of her brain, which had to be removed, having a half of her face paralyzed, not necessarily remembering every detail. But from that moment on, Catherine had an option. She said, I can try and cover up the pain. I can try and cover up the hurt. I can hide myself from the world, or maybe Jesus had me go through this so I could help somebody else out so they could see the beauty in their brokenness. That is what she did. She is now a public speaker going around encouraging people with disabilities to embrace them, to say that it is a beautiful part of God's masterpiece in our lives. And she runs a camp for Christians with disabilities, encouraging them to embrace God's love, because through that brokenness, God showed his power through her. It is beauty in brokenness. I don't know the brokenness in your lives right now. I don't know all of the pain. I don't know all of the suffering, but I do know something, that the most beautiful person, that the masterpiece that is Christ, saw you as broken jars of clay as worthy, and he broke himself for you so that he could dwell in you, so that he could show the beauty that you are, and his power could show other people that they too are a masterpiece. If you are struggling with something here today, God is inviting you to embrace it. To embrace it, because one day what you're struggling with, God may use to help somebody else out with through your experience. Or if there's someone else you know that's struggling, maybe you need to remind them that they are God's masterpiece, despite their brokenness, because there is something beautiful there. Amen.